Who killed John O'Neill? Who killed John O'Neill? Who killed John O'Neill?
See, there's one thing ties all these points together. The cartel, AIG, the CIA, the Contras, Noriega. One thing connects them all. The BCCI. The Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or for our discussion today, the granddaddy of all money laundering scams. The BCCI was, and remains, the largest instance of fraud and bankruptcy in global history. Located out of Abu Dhabi, the BCCI operated without fail throughout the 70s and 80s as a money laundering and investment finance bank.
This is documented in the investigation by Morgenthau and Cherkasky in New York, but also by the investigation in the United States Senate, which was headed by Senator John Kerry. Financial ties can be made between the BCCI and Manuel Noriega through his facilitation of the drug trade. By 1992, the BCCI was broke and busted up by U.S. authorities.
However, one point about this rarely mentioned case is that a principal shareholder of the BCCI, right, is a guy named Khalid bin Mahfouz. Khalid bin Mahfouz.
A Saudi financier and investment banker,
whose other claim to fame is his dubious investment in a company called Harkin in the late 80s.
Harkin? Isn't that one of George W. Bush's companies?
The man with a 20% stake in the largest money laundering operation the world has ever seen saved our president's business career.
Khalid bin Mahfouz has also been implicated as one of many very prominent Saudis who has funneled money to Osama bin Laden.
That would make President Bush someone who has done business with a known terrorist! Bin Mahfouz.
Regardless, the drug trade is going to escalate in the 1980s. And why wouldn't it? Reagan is your president, and Bush is your VP.
Okay, the greatest drug smuggler in the history of drug smuggling was a guy named Barry Seal. Barry Seal, okay? He was an admitted CIA agent, okay? He was contracted at least as back as like the early 60s.
In the early 60s, Barry Seal was living in New Orleans, where he joins a Civil Air Patrol unit, whose captain is an eccentric fellow by the name of David Ferry.
Joe Pesci from JFK?
Ferry was, by all indications, a conspirator in the JFK assassination. And another member of the Civil Air Patrol unit is
Lee Harvey Oswald.
So the drug trade is somehow tied to the JFK assassination?
Seemingly. But the connections don't stop there. Barry Seal was a pilot, a great pilot by all accounts. Now everyone assumes that David Ferry was a getaway pilot for the assassins in Dallas, so it's possible to presume that Barry Seal was one as well.
In late 1963, Seal is seen in a picture with Frank Sturgis and Felix Rodriguez.
Sturgis was indicted and convicted as one of the 5 Watergate burglars. He testified in court that his handler on that assignment was E. Howard Hunt.
Hunt, you remember, worked in the Nixon White House. Now, the Rockefeller Commission, investigating illegal acts by the CIA in the 70s, regarded both Hunt and Frank Sturgis as possible conspirators in the JFK assassination.
What is Barry Seal doing in a photograph with a possible JFK assassin?
But it's the other man in the Seal photograph who has a more ominous distinction.
Felix Rodriguez was a Cuban refugee. In the late 50s, he began working with the CIA to recruit more refugees for an invasion of Cuba. This was done under the direction of the CIA agent Ted Shackley.
Incidentally, Ted Shackley also worked the Far East drug trade with Richard Secord in the early 50s. Felix Rodriguez also figures into the assassination of Bolivian President Che Guevara in 1967. So where is Barry Seal in all of this? He's in New Orleans until at least 1968, when he takes over for the late David Ferry as captain of the Civil Air Patrol.
Now, in the early 70s, Barry Seal is running cocaine through New Orleans. He's running it on planes later identified to be former Air America planes.
Planes used by the CIA in the 50s and 60s to ship heroin from the Far East.
When the Medellin cartel is founded, Seal immediately hooks up with their operation. By 1981, he is trafficking in more drugs than anyone in the history of this country.
And it is around this time that Barry Seal moves his operation from New Orleans to Mena, Arkansas.
And where is that?
About 180 miles from Little Rock. A small little out-of-the-way mountain town. A small little out-of-the-way mountain town that just so happens to have a major U.S. airport.
The Mina Intermountain Municipal Airport. From at least 1981 to 1986, this airport is ground zero for all illegal narcotics activity in the United States.
You see, Barry Seal, he began flying his drugs into this airport, most likely with the knowledge of then-President Reagan and the next two presidents, Bush and Clinton.
How does he get away with it?
He only gets away with it for a little while.
It is suspected that SEAL traffics in nearly $5 billion worth of cocaine in this 5-year period. The U.S. Attorney in Arkansas at this time, Asa Hutchinson, never opens an investigation, even though FBI informants, MENA employees, and the Arkansas State Police have all told him that this illegal drug trafficking has been occurring.
Ironically, Hutchinson went on to head the DEA and is now the Undersecretary for Border Transportation and Security in the Department of Homeland Security.
So SEAL is virtually untouchable for this period. Even though the FBI and the DEA have all opened up investigations into his operation, he remains a contract agent with the CIA. But with overwhelming evidence of drug trafficking mounting against him, he finally turned states in 1985. He testifies in several trials against Medellin traffickers.
And this compromises the entire CIA operation. I mean, Barry Seal isn't only running drugs for the cartel, he's also involved in the drugs for arms trade in Nicaragua.
The DEA even places him in a sting to photograph Contras loading cocaine onto an airplane in Nicaragua.
Seal's next mission is to trick Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers into coming to a neutral third-party country where they will be extradited. I mean, he's about to take down the entire Medellin cartel.
But then news of Seal's cooperation with the DEA became leaked to the national media. He has to be called back in midair from his task to meet with the Ochoa brothers and Pablo Escobar.
And who is responsible for this press leak? Admittedly, it is none other than Oliver North, the primary figurehead in the Iran-Contra scandal.
Barry Seal is later gunned down in Baton Rouge, assassinated by the Medellin cartel. It is rumored that on his dead body is the personal private phone number of George H.W. Bush.
The MENA operation, it's already in jeopardy, but it becomes a major problem when one of Seal's former planes is shot down by Sandinistas later on in 1986.
The only survivor of the crash is a man named Eugene Hassenfuss, and he claims he is running cocaine for the CIA. The plane can be tracked back to MENA, so for the time being, the MENA operation is close to being exposed.
No president has ever spoken directly about the events in Mena, Arkansas. However, Governor Clinton, just when he was rising from obscurity to become president, made his only public comments about the massive drug operation being conducted right in his own backyard.
In 1991, Clinton referred to the Arkansas State Police investigation of MENA and the drug trafficking thereof as having linkages to the federal government, and includes all kinds of questions whether he, meaning Seal, had any links to the CIA, and if that backed into the Iran-Contra deal.
The war on drugs, it's just a war against the inner cities. The wealthy line their pockets with all the illegal drug money, drugs that they bring into the country themselves, and they peddle it off to the poor people in the ghettos. I'll give you one guess as to the primary bank used for laundering the money from the global drug trade.
The BCCI.
And then there's AIG.
AIG means its own fleet of aircraft.
AIG owns and maintains over 400 airplanes.
Any number of these planes could be used for the transfer of narcotics. And in 1987, the Arkansas Development Financial Agency collaborated with AIG to found Coral Reinsurance.
Named after Carlos Leader's wife, the same year Leader was extradited. The formation of this company has never been filed with the SEC. There's no known paperwork on it at all.
And Arkansas was where Seal was flying in his drugs.
Yes, as a CIA operation.
With Bill Clinton as governor of Arkansas.
During the heyday of the BCCI,
With Noriega still in power in Panama,
And with John Gotti heading the New York Mafia.
where more drugs end up than anywhere in the world.
This truly is a vast conspiracy.
You could say that.
and AIG's founder is a well-known CIA operative, C.V. Starr. And and one of AIG's current directors is the son of CIA founder Frank Wisner.
Now, the chairman and CEO of AIG is a man named Maurice Hank Greenberg. Now, he's formerly the head of the New York Stock Exchange and the Federal Reserve. Not only that, in 1995, his name was floated by all people, Jay Rockefeller, to be head of the CIA.
Instead, Bill Clinton appointed John Deutsch, who had been a director of the SAIC, the technology and biodefense company formerly advised by Jerome Howard and Stephen Hatfield.
But don't lose sight of Greenberg.
Maurice Greenberg has also chaired the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR.
What's that?
One of the most powerful organizations in the world.
Founded in 1921 by President Wilson's chief counselor, Colonel Edward House, the CFR operates as the primary advisor to the United States government.
The CFR's principal contact in the U.S. is the CIA. And the chairman of the CFR is the CEO of AIG. With its obvious intelligence links, just imagine how scary it is to think about a company like AIG. Insurance companies are the foremost private intelligence gathering agencies in the world. Who knows more about you than your insurance company? Your medical records, your bank records, driving records, personal history, your fucking life story. Just think if that company was sharing information with the government. Worse. Just think if that company had $100 billion in assets and could invest that money at will.
You're saying that money laundered from the drug trade could be used to fund terrorism.
There's one fact I haven't told you yet.
What's that?
In 1993, AIG became the principal shareholder of Kroll Associates.
I got a hard time believing all this crap. All of what? The CIA runs the global drug trade. For what purpose? And what does it have to do with 9/11?
70% of the world's opium is produced in Afghanistan. Think about that for a second. The CIA has run heroin and cocaine for 50 years. They had a military presence in Afghanistan in the 80s, and they created the Mujahideen.
And you think all that is related?
After the fall of the CIA in the 70s, and with the near disastrous Iran-Contra and MENA exposures, the intelligence community had to realize that its facilitation of the drug trade, if revealed to the public, could prove fatal to any and all future endeavors. So, if you're the CIA, you might get a little smarter about it. With MENA, the CIA had no cover story, no backup plan. Instead, the entire operation was nearly outed, and the whole global drug trade almost became public knowledge. You have to move the MENA operation. Well, where do you move it to?
Someplace even more out of the way than MENA.
And what's more out of the way than flight school?
Wow.
Where did Mohammed Atta get his flight training?
Hoffman Aviation School in Venice, Florida.
There are over 200 flight schools in Florida. Why did the hijackers just happen to choose Huffman?
Hoffman Aviation is authorized by the INS to issue these very popular vocational student visas to foreigners. These allow people to enter the country legally and without much paperwork.
Mohammed Atta had one of these visas. Guess who gave it to him?
It's Rudy Deckers, CEO of Hoffman Aviation.
And there is overwhelming evidence that Rudy Deckers works for the CIA.
Why would a CIA agent run a flight school?
On July 5th, 2000, the DEA discovered over 30 pounds of heroin on a plane owned by Wally Hilliard.
And who is he?
He is the owner of Hoffman Aviation.
The same Hoffman Aviation which in the 1990s induced hundreds of Arab students to come and train at their school by issuing these highly coveted visas.
Is it starting to make sense now?
30 pounds of cocaine, Arab men posing as students, CIA agent as CEO. Okay, I see where you're going with all this.
The MENA operation didn't stop.
It just changed locations to this flight school and probably dozens of others. And Mohammed Atta's role in all of this? He is not training to be a pilot. He is a pilot. He is the new Barry Seal. There is evidence Mohammed Atta had flight training at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And if he already has flight training, why is he attending a flight training school? Who says Al-Qaeda is a terrorist operation? Al-Qaeda was formed in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. The phrase translates literally to mean the base. They are essentially an arm of the former Mujahideen, which was created by the CIA. The CIA runs drugs globally. The CIA trains its own armies and pilots and instills a military presence in every country, all around their crop. The Sandinistas, the Colombian death squads, and now Al-Qaeda. If you're pushing 70% of the world's heroin out of one country, and something goes wrong and the operation becomes public, you need a backup plan. Al-Qaeda isn't involved in terrorism. They're just framed up as terrorists to hide their true nature. They are a drug cartel, plain and simple. All that video they show of Osama firing his machine gun and training all those people, he's not training terrorists. He's training soldiers. Soldiers to guard the heroin trade. When 9/11 happens and Al-Qaeda is pinned for the crime, no one cares at all about the heroin smuggling. Because drug smuggling means nothing to people who have just watched the World Trade Center explode. Alright, but you're still missing a major point here, okay? How could Al-Qaeda smuggle all this heroin out of Afghanistan when the Taliban abolished all poppy farming in 1999? The Taliban did this? Says who? You're saying they didn't? I know the US claims they did it, but if the Taliban did this, tell me, how did they make $40 million off of taxes from opium farmers in 2000? So what are you saying? I'm saying the Taliban only eradicated their crop on paper. In reality, the heroin trade continued. There were fucking aerial photographs, surveillance, satellite imagery. The goddamn fields were being burned. Of course they were. Part of the process of growing any kind of crop is eradicating the fields to then regrow the plants. And it makes no sense for the Taliban to stop the flow of opium. It's the only thing keeping the economy afloat at all. Because if you have a cartel like Al-Qaeda, functioning as a patsy, being blamed for terrorist attacks all over the world, you would need a government not recognized by the United Nations. That way, you couldn't invade, and you couldn't extradite any of the terrorists. And the heroin trade goes on without missing a beat. So what you are saying, let me get this straight. What you are saying is that the only reason they do 9/11 is specifically to hide the fact that Al-Qaeda is a drug cartel? Because I gotta tell you, that is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my entire life. 9/11 didn't just hide the opium trade. It gave the United States a free pass to invade Afghanistan and build the oil pipeline they had been planning for years. It set up a race war. It set up a religious war. It opened the door for the United States to attack anybody it deemed was harboring terrorists. Internationally or domestically. And what did W say? You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And 9/11 instilled in us the basest of all fears. Any time, any day, any place, an airplane, tall building, subway, shopping mall, grocery store, local newsstand, chemical, biological, nuclear, doesn't matter. 9/11 could happen again. And guess what? It will happen again. It's inevitable. This is a lifelong battle. In this corner, you have the United States, the shining example of freedom, peace, and goodwill. And in the other corner, you have Al-Qaeda, dirty, bearded, hate-mongering terrorists. The whole thing's a setup. It's a show. It's theater. It distracts all of us from what's really going on. The systematic destruction of national sovereignty all across the world. That is preposterous. What's easier to believe? When Al-Qaeda is a vicious terrorist organization bent on annihilating all freedom and peace in the world? Or it's a cartel whose sole purpose is to ensure the safety of the heroin trade out of the Middle East? That is a real tough one. I'm gonna go with option A. They are Islamic fundamentalists. They flew fucking planes into the World fucking Trade Center. Okay? They killed some 3,000 infidels along with themselves because Allah told them it was a smart thing to do. If I were to tell you that a man habitually does cocaine, frequents strip clubs and escort services, would you believe he were A, a drug runner, or B, an Islamic fundamentalist? That's obvious. What is your fucking point? The man I am referring to is Mohammed Atta. Mohammed Atta did cocaine. Mohammed Atta was seen doing cocaine several times before 9/11. And what's more, Atta isn't seen doing this all by himself. Often, Rudy Deckers is with him, the guy who runs the flight school. Islamic fundamentalism strictly forbids the ingestion of any unnatural drug, and it firmly teaches that treating women as objects of desire is a sin. So if Mohammed Atta is already committing sins, he ain't going to paradise to see Allah, that's for sure. So why would he then take his own life in a terrorist attack? If you can conclude that Mohammed Atta did not fly one of those planes into the World Trade Center, then you must conclude something else happened on 9/11. You're right. And that begs the question, what really happened on 9/11? War and drugs are the biggest businesses in the world. They are tools to amass the greatest fear and exercise the mightiest control. Control over the mind. They waved the flag of war, proposing to wield the ultimate power in places afar, using 9/11 as a fucking bargaining chip. Support this war, or you're gonna get attacked again. Bow down on unconstitutional security measures, otherwise the guy sitting next to you, he might blow you up. Allow us to attack our enemies before they attack us, otherwise all freedom is lost. It's a protection racket. All the government is the mob. And their greatest crime is profiting from acts of war. And everybody's in on it. Defense contractors manufacture weapons for use during war, while supporting and financing political candidates who will go to war. The government that buys weapons from these companies in the event of war. Now with war crippling to most economies, nations must then borrow money and go into debt. And all that money goes right up to the top of the food chain, to the banks, which is where it came from in the first place. Only now there's a difference. Because the money lent now has an insane amount of interest attached to it, more than most nations can afford to pay off. And then the cycle repeats itself. No one ever wonders where the national debt comes from. Who loans countries the trillions of dollars it takes to fund a national budget? Is it us? Is it the people? If that's true, then the government owes us $7 trillion. It's not us. We didn't give them $7 trillion. There are only 250 billion Federal Reserve notes in circulation. Where the fuck does all this money come from? From banks, from private multinational institutions that can exert immense power from behind the scenes. The kind of clout gained from having every person, state, province, and nation in debt to you. By controlling all money in the world, you can control all people in the world. And the more war there is, the more money there is. Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, the SAIC, Carlyle Group, the list goes on. Every single one of these companies makes its living off of the misery of others, and to them, it's just business as usual. These companies even arm our enemies before we fight them. They can even control people with the threat of war, and when a tragedy strikes, when the nation is in mourning, when we are at our most vulnerable state, what do they tell us to do? Shop. They tell us to spend money. Trying to make a quick buck off of grieving people. It's not capitalism, it's not consumerism, it's not even corporatism. You know what it is? It is corporate fundamentalism. All these people know how to do is bring everything to market. The banks, the corporations, the government, the elite. They use poverty to marginalize the rest of the world. The upper 1%. When they tell us there are minorities, blacks, Latinos, Asians, the only minority that counts is the upper 1%. The rest of us are just slaves. Slaves to the dollar, slaves to the elite, slaves to their dogma. And dogma is so powerful because as soon as you believe it, you become afraid of its opposite. It's divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. And they do more than just that. They brainwash us in other ways. Just think back to 9/11. Think back to how confused and helpless we all were. Over and over and over and over, the TV just kept showing the replays. The towers kept falling. Patients suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder will often face a recurring trauma. In this state, scientists have proven that the human mind is very susceptible to suggestion. These people will believe anything you tell them. We all incurred major trauma on 9/11. They could have told us that fucking UFOs piloted those planes into the Twin Towers, and on 9/11, we would have believed them because we just needed it to stop. We just needed to point the finger at someone and say they are responsible, and because we needed to know our government could protect us. It was PTSD on a national scale. All the images, the rhetoric, patriotic American themes, it has all hijacked our minds. Senator Johnson said in 1917, the first casualty when war comes is the truth.
So, you really want to know what happened on 9/11?
I am prepared to listen.
were they members of or associated with the government?
Yes, well, one of them is a very key figure in security. He's a former military officer. He is someone that has had dealings with Jaish-e-Mohammed, one of the banned groups with Maulana Azhar, who was in an Indian jail for decapitating 3 British tourists and 3 American tourists. And he also had dealings with Umar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Umar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Umar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden.
Tu aurais dû rester où tu étais. Tu ne connais plus les règles du jeu à présent.
Expliquez-moi. Il y a 8 ans, celui-là, c'était une cible.
Notre budget a été réduit. On s'est fait massacrer par le Congrès. Alors il a fallu que je fasse avec. Et je me suis retrouvé obligé de recruter des agents du bord opposé au nôtre.
Les restrictions de budget, tout ça à cause du budget. L'opération Lune de Miel.
Que je suis bête.
Vous voulez collecter des fonds?
Collecter des fonds? 1993. Le World Trade Center a explosé, vous vous en souvenez? Il y a un des accusés qui a dit pendant le procès que la CIA était au courant de tout. Le visa diplomatique de ce cher accusé était délivré par la CIA. Nous ne sommes pas loin de penser qu'ils ont commandité cette bombe pour justifier une augmentation de crédit.
Vous voulez me faire croire que vous engagez des faux terroristes, et ça seulement pour soutirer du fric au Congrès?
Malheureusement, monsieur Kensi, je ne sais pas comment je vais fabriquer 4000 morts. Alors je crois que nous allons les tuer pour de vrai. On attribuera ça aux musulmans, naturellement. Et j'obtiendrai mes subventions. Bonne nuit, Charlie.